It is our duty to keep joy alive. That's Tage Danielsson, a famous Swedish author and comedian who otherwise didn't shy away from the tragic and the absurd. You may ask how it's even possible to stand here and talk about things like hope and joy and optimism, given everything that's going on. I don't even need to mention what I have in mind, right? I can just wave my arms like so, and you'll know exactly. It sounds frivolous, maybe cringe, but I'm here to tell you that Danielsson was right, and a measure of optimism is not only possible, but something of a moral imperative. I've changed my mind on this myself. So I'm Generation X. Of course, the standard joke is that nobody thinks about Generation X, right? We were the latchkey kids and so on. But if we've known for anything at all, it's for our sense of sarcasm and cynicism and ironic detachment. And let me tell you, I'm perfectly fluent in all of those things. But I changed my mind thanks to the students that I meet as a university instructor. These students were born in this century much of the time, and so obviously they're members of a very different generation from me. When my colleagues and I talk to them about the major challenges, including things like climate change, we feel an urge to emphasize continually just how bad the situation is and just how terrible things will be if we fail to act on time, where on time is now. We've been conditioned by decades of climate skepticism, people questioning whether climate change is real at all, people asking whether humans really had anything to do with it, and so on. Moreover, we're frustrated by the lack of action. We wish we saw more action from the point of view or on behalf of the politicians, the public, the corporations, and so on. And very often I get the sense that people hope that if we just dial it up a little bit, we'll finally see the kind of action that we're hoping to see. At the same time, pessimism has emerged as something of a threat to public health. So there's this epidemic of climate anxiety where predominantly young people report being depressed and dejected and demoralized and experiencing something of decision paralysis in the face of all the problems that we have. And so we appear to have found ourselves in a situation where my community, the scientists, the adults in the room, communicate the challenges we're facing in a way that risks making, especially young people, less likely, not more likely, to do something about them. And to the extent that that's true, we've become part of the problem and not part of the solution. So the question that I'm asking is, can we find a way to talk about these challenges that doesn't understate or paper over the challenges that we're facing, the challenges that are very real, but that finds a way that tends to stimulate action rather than inaction? We can and we must. I'm a researcher too. And I find inspiration in a community of scholars who refer to themselves as climate optimists. This is a group of scholars who've decided to talk about the major challenges that we're facing in a way that's explicitly and mindfully optimistic. Marcy Frank is a science communicator at Harvard, and I think she puts it best. She says, the first thing I wish people understood about climate optimists is that it isn't about denying that which we can see with our own eyes. It also isn't about ignoring the grief we feel for that which we've lost. It's about emphasizing that we know what needs to be done to prevent things from getting worse, and we have a plan in place in order to succeed. The challenge, she says, is to yes and the crap out of otherwise conflicting thoughts. The point of this train of thought, as I understand it, is to not think about optimism in terms of a free-floating feeling to the effect that everything will be fine no matter what. Because we can't be optimists in that sense, and we shouldn't, right? Things won't be fine no matter what. Rather, Frank is encouraging us to think of optimism as a conviction or a judgment to the effect that things can get better if we apply ourselves, alongside maybe a commitment to make sure that they do. In this sense, optimism isn't a feeling at all. It's a judgment that can be rational, scientific, and evidence-based. Moreover, there's a ton of evidence to support optimism in that sense. Any major problem, major challenge, you name it, scientists have studied it probably for decades, generations, or a century. Scientists have explored where this problem came from and what future scenarios might look like. Scientists have identified solutions that we could realistically apply and explored which ones look more promising. There's a great deal of agreement, there's a great deal more agreement among scientists than people often think when it comes to these solutions. Now, obviously, I'll add right away, science doesn't deliver magical wands or silver bullets, right? If you demand magic, I'll direct you to the fiction aisle. What science does is the next best thing, strategies and solutions based on evidence, where the evidence gives us reason to try those solutions and evidence to think that they will work. Optimism, in this sense, can't just be evidence-based, rational, and scientific. It can also be radical. Just ask Darren Woods, CEO of ExxonMobil, one of the biggest oil companies on the globe. He gave a talk at Davis about a year ago in front of an audience of global decision makers, where he argued that it's really too late to act on climate change. You know, it's really too bad, he says. But in his words, we have, as a community, failed to open the aperture on the solution sets that could have allowed us to reduce emissions. We had an opportunity, he says, in the 1970s when we could have fixed problems, but that didn't happen. And the reason, he says, is that people didn't care enough. Like, the oil companies had nothing to do with this. People just didn't care enough. Now, the question that I ask is, like, why does he get up in front of an audience now to advocate pessimism or even fatalism in the face of climate change? Well, there's an obvious hypothesis, which is he's worried that people aren't pessimistic enough, right? His concern is that we don't think it's too late. An optimist, somebody who acts out of a conviction that things can be turned around, that things can still be made better, is a threat to his business model, which is to keep burning fossil fuels until apocalypse comes. So optimism, in the sense that I have in mind, is a radical stance. When I say that it matters how we talk about things, I'm not just speculating. There's a ton of research on climate behavior and various behaviors related to outcomes that we care about. I have in mind a study that came out last year by a team of scientists headed up by Jay van Bavel at NYU. This is a study performed by hundreds of researchers who worked in 63 different countries and who recruited almost 60,000 participants. It was about the reaction to climate messaging, information related to climate. The messages were chosen to be plausibly motivational, so the kind of messages that you might think would move the dial on behavior related to climate change. Every participant got a number of these messages, and what the scientists were interested in was tracking two main outcomes. First, they were looking at the extent to which people were motivated to go out and say something on social media about what they had just learned. The second thing that they were looking at was to what extent people were willing to do something, to take action, to mitigate the problem they were talking about. In this case, people who participated in the study were offered an opportunity to work in order to have trees planted in Africa. The main message that I'm interested in here is a message that the scientists described as doom and gloom. It was a message that emphasized just how bad the situation is right now and just how awful things will be if we fail to act. Part of the message was a line that said, if you think things are bad now, you haven't seen nothing yet. It's going to be so bad even in your lifetime. The message was selected to activate a fear response in the listeners, and it worked. People got agitated. The message also worked in the sense that it made them more likely to go on social media and say something about how awful things are. So to that extent, the message had the intended effect. But when it comes to actually doing something to mitigate the problems of climate change, people who got the doom and gloom message were less likely, not more likely, to do something about the problem. So just like my students had told me, when everything you hear is how bad the problem is and how terrible things will be if we don't act, you risk being less likely to do something about it. That kind of message is demotivational. Does that sound strange? Maybe it sounds strange. But think of it in this way. Climate psychologists encourage us to think of the analogy of going to the doctor. Suppose you go to the doctor and they tell you, you have a heart condition. It's very serious. The condition might end up killing you. Suppose now that the doctor goes on, it's really very bad. It's awful. This can kill you. It really can kill you. It's sick. It's going to kill you. After a while, you begin to get frustrated, right? You want to hear what the diagnosis is. You want to know how serious it is. And you want to know the prognosis. But once you've absorbed that information, you don't want the doctor to keep going, right? It's harmful. What you want the doctor to do is to switch to a different kind of conversation. You want the doctor to say, here's the good news. The outcome isn't cast in stone. The probabilities are, to some extent at least, under your control, and here are the things that you can do in order to influence those probabilities. X, Y, Z, whatever it may be, eat better, exercise more, drink less, and so on. The point of this study, and the reason why I bring it up, is that the same conclusion might hold for any other challenge that we're facing. We need to know how bad the situation is. We want to know what we're facing. But once we've absorbed the information, what we need to do is to move on to a conversation about what we can do about it. I'm not here to tell anyone how you should feel in the face of climate change. I'm not here to tell anyone how you should talk about it in the privacy of your home. What I'm trying to say is I'm trying to urge everyone who talks about these things to think about the ways in which the message is framed and whether the framing will make people more or less likely to act. I'm not just a teacher and a researcher, I'm a father as well. I have 3 young daughters. And I know that there will be a time when they ask me what I did in the face of climate change and all the other disasters that we're looking at. Here's what will not cut it. If I say, well, I was very cynical about it, I posted many cynical messages on Facebook, right? That's not going to be an answer. Here's another thing that's not going to cut it. Well, I told everyone things were going very badly, and I accurately predicted what would happen, right? They will not take that for an answer. I need to act now in such a way that I can say honestly then that I did everything I could to keep hope alive. If Omar al-Shogur could keep hope alive given everything he went through, so can we. Thank you.